The next thing that I have here is collaging backgrounds and doodles. Okay, so when it comes to collaging, pretty much you can use all different kinds of papers to do your collaging. Any kinds of scraps will pretty much do scraps that you have that you save. You can also use pages from an old book. In this case, this is like a dictionary that I purchased at a thrift store, and I purchased it for the sole purpose of, you know, using these pages up. I like the way that they feel, and I like the way that they lay down, so I will usually use these kinds of things. So when it comes to collaging, you don't necessarily have to buy elements, and you can always make your own elements. And how you can make your own elements is by stamping, fussy cutting, things that you see in magazines and or books and or papers that you have. This is an example of collaging. All of these images were all pulled from a magazine, and I pretty much fuzzy cut them all and applied them down, and I glued them down with my matte medium, which that's not it. There it is. I applied these down with my matte medium, and the reason that I did that is because I wanted to be able to doodle over the page, and I wanted to be able to spread the ink from my markers if that's something that I chose to do. When you're working on a non-porous surface, which is a surface that has been covered by, let's say, matte medium, then the ink is very easily spreadable. I would not personally recommend that you seal your page with, let's say, decoupage, only because the pages will stick. They do tend to stick at certain points. So when you close your book and let's say you're storing your book and you go open your book, you'll get that. You'll get that your pages stick, and it might rip little pieces off here and there. I kind of learned that the hard way, and I will show you. This was sealed with decoupage. And if you notice, she's got little white specks here and there and pieces that were pretty much ripped off. And they're part of this page now, right? And that's why I do not recommend. How I was able to remove the sticking is that I used, I put baby powder in like a sock, kind of like for anti-static for when you're doing embossing, and I just kind of slapped it all over the page so that it's kind of covered with baby powder, very fine baby powder, and that kind of helped alleviate some of the sticking that was happening to my page. So if you have an old sock laying around, then I do recommend that you do that. Once your page is completely dry, just slap it around a little bit and just, you know, wipe it down and just spread your hand over it just so that you can control some of that stickiness. That way you don't have an issue. Here's another example, and this page is all over the place. I have not created a video, and I don't think I will be creating a video for this one, but I will go over with you more or less what I did with this one. This one has some collaging elements. I did decoupage some paper down here, and then I went over it with some matte medium. This is stenciling, and this is stenciling that I created using a stencil. The stars as well are stencils, and this is the reason why you want to prepare and prep your pages, because at the end of the day, as you can see, I use sprays. I use a lot of wet mediums on this page, and because these books tend to be kind of sewn on there and or glued, your pages will become undone if you use too much water and you don't have your pages protected. Plus it makes it nice, as you can see, it's it doesn't bend so easily anymore, as opposed to here are some collage elements. As opposed to this page here, that you can kind of see has a lot of bend to it. The gesso page doesn't have that much, and you could hear it. It almost sounds like and you can, you know, you can hear the stiffness of it. But you can go ahead and add all different kinds of texture to it. So that's why we prep our pages. Here are some collage elements, and I got these out of magazines. And these are just interesting, you know, it could be anything that you want it to be. You know, you can use any parts of it that you want. And these are just some of the things that I have stored in this book that I plan on using later on. But you can save words, you can save all different kinds of things, you know, different body parts, and it doesn't even have to be people. You can, you know, bottles, anything that catches your eye that seems interesting to you, then clip it and save it. That's what I would say. But more or less, that's what collaging is just the adding of different elements on your background that are paper, that are paper related, and or adding embellishments, trinkets, things of that nature. But that's a little bit more into the heavier, like mixed media style work, because a book like this, you can't add too much dimension in the inside because then it won't close, and as the pages become more and more and more and more, your book will be opening, and it'll get to a point that it'll be open like this, and you won't be able to close it because you just have so many things. So it's good if you want to use dimension, you can. Like I have dimensional stickers here, but they're not that bulky, so it doesn't really affect too much. But let's say I had all my pages with these kinds of things, then yeah, it would be really hard for my book to close. This one has decoupaging here. All of these elements here are decoupaged from napkin. If I can find the napkin, what did I do with it? It's somewhere around there, but anyway, this is all napkin pieces, and I decoupage that on top of cardstock, and then I just fuzzy cut around them so that I can use these elements on my page. And this one does not have that much dimension because everything was glued flat onto the page, so this one closes without a problem. And this is also prepared in the background, and then I used different kinds of paints on here to create this page. And here, as you can see, all the shading that is done on this tree. The reason that shading was possible with markers is because this was, I passed matte medium over this. So this was all sealed with matte medium, so it allowed me the ability to add ink in different parts and just spread that ink as thinly as I wanted or in the areas that I wanted. And I was able to get shading around, the tree because it was all, processed with matte medium. So I was able to grab like a Q-tip or my finger and just rub that ink out while it was still wet and spread it out, which creates the nice shading effects on that tree. And it went from being just a piece of scrap paper to a tree that in my eyes looks very realistic because of the way that it took the shading. Let me see if I find another example. Maybe you guys can see it, but this right here, the whole page is entirely sealed with matte medium. So I was able to add lines and then just spread it out with my finger, to create that illusion of shadow, of dimension, because that's what shadow does. Shadow creates dimensions on things that are flat. And by adding the marker and or paint or whatever it is that you're adding around your edges and smudging it out to a very thin, to a very almost transparent like state, you create this illusion of shadow, of dimension, like the images are popping off of your page, which is why you see a lot of people adding these shadow elements to their drawings and or their collaging and just different elements. Here I use stencil, and I use stencil with paint because you don't just have to stencil with, let's say, your modeling paste. If you don't want to, dabble with modeling paste, that's fine. You don't have to. Grab yourself some paint, and you can do this with paint. Now let's talk about some paint, you guys. So when it comes to paints, we have different kinds of paints. We have your paints that come in tubes, which usually tend to be a little bit thicker, right? Just put that there. We have your paints that come in tubes. Sorry about that. Just had to get that really quickly. We have your Crafters acrylic paints, which usually come in small bottles like this. These are 2-ounce bottles, and these are by Deco Art, and these are their Crafters acrylic brands. We have metallic paints and also metallic waxes, which I didn't bring out, but you also have metallic waxes, which are these little tins that have a very thick paste inside that has metallic color in it that is also water soluble. So we have this, and sorry for the glare, this is Dazzling Metallics by Deco Art. And we also have fluid acrylics. These usually come in a smaller bottle, and these are by Deco Art, their media line. And I will show you the difference between the three paints. I'm going to use this little piece of scrap here. So let's see what color will stand out the most. Let's go ahead and dab on just a little drop of this green, a little drop of this green. You see the dimension of that paint. Hopefully you guys can see that. See the dimension of that paint? See how it's very 3D. I want to be able to show you guys without, yeah, there we go. See how 3D that paint is, how it just stands up? That's a heavier body type of acrylic. Let's see which will be good. Let's use this blue. Let's see. How I can answer this. You see the dimension and peaks, how that green really pops up, but the blue is kind of flatter. It has dimension, but it is kind of flatter. Hopefully you guys can see that. Oops, and I'm dropping. Plus, as you notice, this one didn't run, and this one did run. So perfect example right there. Right? Let me just put this back down, just for now. I'm just allowing this to dry. Hopefully by the time I'm done with this whole thing, it'll be dry. So you notice how that blue kind of ran down just by me holding it at a tilt. Meanwhile, the green one stayed still. That's a heavier acrylic. This is a regular acrylic. And this is fluid acrylic. And let's use this red. And you'll see the difference just as how runny this paint really is. So you see how bold those colors are. And if I tilt it, down, it will also run. And when I apply water, let's move my brushes. Oh, let's apply a little bit of water here. Let me just do this with I didn't bring my brushes out. Just apply a little bit of water to each one of these. About the same amount. This one you can see a little bit of water, like a little drop of water. You see how translucent that kind of got? Really, really quickly. See how loose? Almost like a watercolor. Just a little bit more opaque, but almost like a watercolor, right? Now we have the regular crafter's acrylic. And even though I applied water, because I applied such a little bit amount of water, it's still very thick. It's not as translucent as, let's say, this one here. This one is very, very translucent. This one is not so much. This one's very opaque even with the water kind of added on it. And then this one, which is the heavier body, it looks translucent only because of the color that I chose. But it's a lot more, actually it doesn't look translucent anymore. It's a lot thicker when you apply it. It's a lot thicker when you apply it even with water. You can get it, watered down, because you can water down any of these to any state that you wish. But just with the same amount of water, you get a very different result. This one is it glides very nicely, very smoothly, with the same amount of water that this one. This one glides, it spreads out a little bit further, and this one spreads out even further. So that's pretty much what the difference is here. This one will go to a point, this one will extend that point, and this one will go beyond what that acrylic, crafter's acrylic point is. So, and they tend to dry. This one dried already very quickly. This one is drying. This one will take a lot longer to dry. So that is the 3 different kinds of acrylics that I have used. And then we have our metallics, which is just shimmer paint. It's just regular acrylic paint. It's just like this kind of paint, same consistency as this kind of paint. It just shimmers and shines. Now we have our sprays.